Master's degree in Conservation Ecosystem Management at the fantastic University of Newcastle. Absolutely gorgeous. Did my undergrad in Geography. There's a nice little photo. And I've got a keen interest in invasive species, and I did my dissertation on invasive species in all the animals. So ultimately, why is this important? And it's important because invertebrates are experiencing rapid decline across the UK. Pollinators are particularly vulnerable to these changes. Things like pesticides, climate change, habitat loss and fragmentation, it's all ultimately adding up, and it's not fantastic for them. I didn't put a source for this figure, so trust me, please. 33% of wild-being hoverfly species have seen a decline across the UK since the 80s, which is quite dramatic. And it's not just them two, it's also other types of invertebrates, earthworms, ground beetles, predators like wasps, which maybe many of you don't like, but ultimately they're important to ecosystems. Yeah, so why Holy Island? It's in the northeast coast, absolutely fantastic place, gorgeous. It's owned by Natural England, which is, I believe they're owned by the government. There's over 200 unique plant species there, bunch of unique flora, absolutely biodiverse dune slacks, and it's a significant site for many species. Many species find refuge in this site. There's lots of species which are locally rare that we can find in quite abundant at Holy Island. Absolutely gorgeous place to be. So sand dunes, that's really the meat of it. It's where it all happens. On the surface, they look a bit boring. They look a bit like, oh, it's a bit of sand and some grass on it, but they're really, really fantastic environments for lots of unique types of plants and animals to just thrive. And also, unfortunately, very vulnerable to changes, coastal erosion, rising tides, etc., etc. So the dunes cover the northernmost parts of the island, which I didn't include a map on the slide quite stupidly. You can see that there. Lots of rare flora, lots of endangered and quite important flora, such as creeping willow, which is used by a lot of birds nesting, for like nesting materials, like habitats and stuff like that. Also has its unique flora, such as the Lindisfarne helleborine, which is a unique type of orchid. It supports a wide variety of invertebrates, including the lovely rest species, which we mentioned before. Okay, so what makes invasive species? They're non-native organisms which cause ecological harm to an ecosystem by outcompeting native species, whether that's through getting more resources, or they can introduce diseases, or they can be predators, for example, if they're insects or animals. But in terms of flora, they usually spread really rapidly and usually drown out native flora. Or in ecosystems, they usually spread through human activity. They're not naturally meant to be there. And when they get there, they just overtake. It's really important to note that not every exotic species is invasive. Some of them can just die out, some of them can naturalise. But the bad ones, the ones we really want to try and take care of. Okay, Poo Bear. It comes from New Zealand, it's in parts of Australia, that kind of place. It arrived in 1901, it arrived through trading tweed from New Zealand. The sheep's there, it gets stuck. You can see, this is what it looks like. It spreads through these birds, they get hooked on absolutely everything they touch. And the sheep, they go through the fields, they get it stuck on them, and come to England. Very common tweed actually was the first place it came from. See here, it is fairly all over the UK, but the northeast coast is absolutely sprawling with it. There's places down south as well that have quite a bit of it, but northeast coast a bit more accessible. There you go, there's the hook bears, there's some of it. They just shatter into fragments, like it's really, really difficult to get off, you've really got to be careful. Once it actually gets to a place, it spreads through rhizomes and stolons, which are essentially arms that allow it to creep and just absolutely decimate and cover an entire area within much faster than native species can. Some of these new native flora prevents new growth. It's quite resilient. It's quite resilient to trampling. You try and pick it. You try and weed it. It's always going to find a way back. It's really, really difficult to get rid of. Okay, so in terms of my actual dissertation, what was the whole point of it? What was the aim? What was I trying to do? And I was trying to investigate the effect of poo bear on invertebrate communities at Holy Island. And I did that through determining the abundance and diversity of vegetation at Holy Island. I did that through determining the invertebrate composition at Holy Island, and I did that through seeing whether there was a relationship between poo bear presence and invertebrate biodiversity. Holy Island's a really good place for this because it's a managed island, so if it's still causing problems there, then what's it doing to places that aren't managed? Okay, so the way I did it was through two phases. I needed to identify sites, and I needed to basically figure out what they are. That's what I used NVC for. That is, if you don't know, basically a method to classify habitats in ecosystems. You basically go through, you identify all of the plant species there, and you use that with an NVC guide, essentially, to tell you what type of place it is. Is it a grassland? Is it a dune slack? What are the prominent species there? And that's important because there's no point in me picking several sites, that might be completely different ecosystems. It's not going to work. It's not fantastic for comparison because ultimately poo bear might be more invasive in one environment than it is with another. And then put out yellow pan traps, which are essentially little yellow pans, you put some water and some soap in them, just catches a bunch of invertebrates. They view it as a flower, essentially. They come towards it, think they're going to pollinate it, and instead they drown. And then obviously I had to identify the invertebrates. Once they're captured, there's no point just saying, oh, there's a bunch of flies in there. That's not very useful. I have to figure out what they are. And it's quite difficult, actually. They all look very similar to each other, and I put a lot of time into figuring out exactly what everything is, blah, blah, blah. And then phase two was essentially go back there after figuring all this out and identifying the plants, performing the NVC analysis, and basically saying, like, okay, I've got these sites, which of them are actually useful to me, which ones can I compare? And now I've got the sites and I know where the invertebrates came from, I can kind of compare them and say, okay, well, the invertebrates are different here to here, blah, 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 blah. Invertebrate identification was also done through two methods. It was done through the yellow pan method, and then during the second phase when I went back, it was done during a fit count, which is essentially this list up here, which is a little bit naff, a little bit. It was a highly altered version, to the point where maybe you probably wasn't a fit count anymore, but it was essentially the same methodology behind it. You go to a place at a similar time, similar time in the year, similar time of day, similar weather, and you basically just identify the species that you see interacting with plants. And the benefit to that one is the fact that you can see invertebrate and plant relationships. You can see which invertebrates like which plants, and you can see, well, okay, if the northern marsh orchid, for example, is getting dragged out more by poo bear, then, for example, the dark green fertility butterfly is going to suffer more. So we can figure out more unique relationships like that through that. Okay, so there we go. Invertebrate and flower interactions are important. Even if there was no way to figure out a species, it was still recorded as just an unknown species, because even species abundance, when we don't know what they are, is still important data. Yes, might not be able to figure out, but we can see that there might be a decline in the amount of invertebrates in a certain area compared to another area. Butterflies and moths, they were identified within species just because of the fact that it's fairly easy to do that, especially compared to other things like hoverflies or most of the type of invertebrates, but they were identified as accurately as possible. And then they were sorted into functional groups, which were, there was three of them. There was detritivores, which is essentially your breakdown, matter breakdown insects, like earthworms, etc., etc. Pollinators, you know, the typical bees, butterflies, hoverflies, etc., and predators, things like wasps and other things. Lots of setbacks. Holy Island isn't a fantastic place to do research, it turns out, because it's a tidal island, and that means the tide comes in occasionally. So you've got to wait for the tide to be down, which means that it could cause you to do research at different times of days, which means that different invertebrates could be out, which isn't very fantastic, so you've got to try and line up the times that you go to be similar. You've got to have decent weather at the time, because, well, you're not going to get many pollinators out if it's raining. So it's going to be similar weather every time. Lack of flowering, this research was done early June, so it had to get pushed back a little bit, because ultimately if there's no flowers, it's a bit harder to see the effect that poo-poo bear has on the ecosystems. So it was just lots of waiting is how that was resolved. It was waiting for plants to flower, waiting for the tide to fall back, and waiting for the weather to just get a bit better, which we had quite a wet summer this year, unfortunately. And also taking caution around the school, because poo-poo bear gets absolutely everywhere when you want it to or not. Okay, so this is the map of the MVC that I did. They might not mean Northumberland here, but SD means sand dune essentially. 16B is just the environment classification and the sub-classification. So basically, you can see that there was quite a few 16Bs, there was a couple of 16Cs, yeah, and then there was M13 and SD13 and SD6, which were a bit useless. They had to be wiped out just because of the fact that they were too dissimilar to the other sites. So we were left with 8 sites that we could use across the snow to compare, and 4 of them had poo-poo bear and 4 of them did not, which is annotated by the green or red. So, what did we find? We found that pollinators suffered the most, which makes sense because pollinators are the most fragile in terms of the functional groups. They respond really rapidly to changes in an environment just because of the fact that they rely on flowering plants, basically. You get poo-poo bear and it wipes out flowering plants, it's going to wipe out invertebrates too. Detritivores and predators not so much, because predators can always prey on detritivores, and detritivores don't necessarily care so much because they still have some sort of plant matter to break down. If poo-poo bear is there for too long, it will reduce soil quality, it will reduce plant quality. Eventually detritivores will start to see reduction, but that's a bit further down the line. And then afterwards, maybe predators would see reduction because now they've got less things to predate against. So we expect that. That's what we expect. And it was still quite shocking to see that in a site that's so heavily managed. They manage it through grazing. They have natural deers there that they swam over. They graze there too. They have pulling methods where they have people going around pulling it out. And ultimately, it's never going to work. It's an invasive plant species. It's always going to get absolutely everywhere. So imagine what the effects are on a site that's unmanaged. So what does it mean? Its effect is still relatively limited on the island. We only see the earlier phases of consequences of invasive species with the pollinators, thanks to the management on the site. But without proper care, without proper checkups, it could rapidly get much worse. Now, I think I might have run a bit short, but thank you for listening, guys, and I hope you have some nice questions.